All right. We are live, I believe. How exciting. Welcome
Hello,
to my
everyone.
LinkedIn.
Yeah,
I'm glad you suggested going live on LinkedIn too. I honestly didn't think of that, but when you suggested it, I was like, why not? Why don't we just do that?
it's where we met. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. So, just to kind of give you a little bit of context, and for anybody who might be watching this live, my intention with making this content, with doing this podcast, is I am on this journey of building my dream life. And I have a theory that anybody who has ever built anything great was once nothing more than an inspired idiot. Just
Yeah.
somebody that knew they wanted to build their dream life, had no idea what they were doing, but they were committed to just doing it anyway and just figuring it out as they go. So you're an entrepreneur, you're a writer, you're a speaker, you're a storyteller, and you're a cancer survivor. And you and I connected over our interest in talking about mental health.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of what I specifically want to talk to you about today is that crossover between mental health and entrepreneurship because entrepreneurship is an epic mental journey. And I mean, as Tony Robbins says, what does he say? Success is 80% psychology, 20% mechanics. And I think in entrepreneurship, we just kind of have different words for it. We say mindset, belief, emotional intelligence. So first of all, rude didn't even introduce you. I'll let you introduce yourself and just a little bit about why mental health became a topic that you kind of wanted to focus on with your personal brand.
Absolutely. So I'm Troy. My name is Troy Karnes, and thank you first of all for having me. I appreciate it. We had such a great conversation like a week or two ago, and this is great. So thank you for making the space, and I'm looking forward to our chat today. And why is mental health important to me? Well, I spent decades thinking that it was like chicken up the butt stuff. Like it was just fooey and nonsense, and you talk about mindset, and I just believe that being strong, or at least outwardly showing that you were strong, was good enough to overcome any mental health. And then I was proven incredibly wrong.
Nice. Okay. Do you want to get into that a little bit more?
Elaborate.
What happened that made you realize that you were wrong about it?
Sure. So I came up in a family that was pretty blue collar. I did landscaping. Like my mom worked at a landscaping company, got me a job there. It was my first job. It was what I did like from the time I was in high school through college. And really the stuff that, like, the mindset there was very masculine, or like what I interpreted to be masculine there. But it was sort of like, work hard, don't get in people's way, don't be a burden on anybody, and in fact the opposite, like take on as many burdens as you can. And so I had that mindset forever. And one of which, I think, when you talk about entrepreneurship and leadership, I think a lot of people have a view of leadership that is put everybody else first. And so that's what I did. And what happened to me was, then my cup wasn't full enough to take care of myself or anybody else's, and it took decades for it to catch up to me, but ultimately led to a drinking problem. Ended up going to rehab, like, on the verge of losing my family and everything else. Again, it was pretty awful situation. And everything that I learned there, so this was really funny. I went to rehab, I expected to learn about addiction and how to overcome addiction. And that was about 1% of what I learned. The other 99% was treatment for being a human being. And the strategies that I learned there to, like, get my own mind together are are not specific to addicts at all. They work for everybody. And that's when I decided I should start sharing some of this, because I saw a lot of people kind of doing what I did, and especially young men, trying to be macho, or what they thought was masculine, and always showing strength no matter what. And it just crumbles after a certain amount of time. And I just figured out that asking for help was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign of maturity. And it was something that I felt other people could benefit from.
Yeah. Oh man, there's multiple things that I want to touch on. That your point about what you learned in rehab though is so valid. I spent years in therapy kind of just trying to learn how to, like, I had an eating disorder for many years, and
Yeah.
I realized like I need to relearn how to have a healthy relationship with food and exercise. And I felt the same way, like asking for help kind of felt like I it made me feel weak at first, but I kind of realized over time that asking for help literally just means that you believe you can do better than this and you're curious enough to learn how. But what you said there about thinking that rehab was going to teach you about, addiction and everything, and it really ended up just teaching you things about being a human, that was very similar to my experience. And I felt like the first probably 2 years in therapy, I was constantly thinking like, okay, but when are you going to give me the good stuff? Like, when are you going to teach me the thing that's going to like change me? Like, I want to feel that aha. And then you, somewhere along the journey, you kind of realize, oh, this is an ongoing slow process. Like this is all part of the process. There is no finish line that you cross and then suddenly you're healed.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And it became, that point right there became the basis of everything that I did to keep myself together, right? And the point is, I see people fixing problems all the time. Like, our society is obsessed with fixing problems,
Hmm.
and it makes sense. Lots of people get rich because they find a problem, they figure out how to solve it, then they simplify the solution and then sell it to the masses, right? But in my journey and in my research following it, what I found is that you actually get better results when you realize that the biggest problems that we have and the ones that hold us back the most don't have solutions at all. They will never go away. There are parts of our lives that we have to nurture and maintain constantly, day after day after day. But when we look at it that way and we just put some ways to nurture ourselves in there, we end up with better results, which is a little counterintuitive, but I think a lot of people see this.
Yeah. Did you find, because I know you had told me that before you went to rehab, you were actually in sales for alcohol, right? Like you were in, was it wine industry, the wine industry?
I spent my whole professional career selling alcohol. So I started in a wine shop. Then I moved up and worked for a wine distributor. So the distributor sells to wine shops and bars and restaurants. And then I went from the distributor to a whiskey producer. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So your whole career at one point was based around alcohol, and then you go to rehab and you decide, okay, that's not going to be a part of my life anymore. So I imagine there must have been a moment where you were like, well, shit, where do I go from here?
Well, there were a couple. So first, it wasn't just my career. Like, I made alcohol my entire identity, right? It was, yes, it was my profession, but I also wanted to be known as the person who you would go to if you had questions, right? So here's a good example. My mom doesn't drink, but for gifts or whatever, she wants to have a bottle of wine around in case people come over, and it's something that she gifts. And she would call me, mind you, she was living 2,000 miles away at the time. She would call me looking at the wine shelf and read the labels to me because she's oh, Troy knows about wine. I'll call him, right? Like, I wanted to be that go-to guy.
Hmm.
Uh, and it wasn't just that, it was like in my social life too. Everything revolved around drinking. Like, I never thought, oh, what do I want to eat? I always thought, like, what do I want to drink, and then I'll eat food that goes with it, right? So, like, oh, if I want margaritas, then, like, great, let's go get tacos, right? If I want, like, but it was drink first, then everything else. And that made it incredibly difficult because I felt pinned in. Like, I didn't understand any other industries. It was my only professional experience. And so, yeah, making that switch was, yeah, that was hard. but you
Yeah.
realize you have more transferable skills than you think you do.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's something I wanted to touch on because a lot of the people that I speak to in my sales role and in like my coaching are people who either are working a full-time job and they've got their thing on the side, or they're
Mhm.
brand new at entrepreneurship. And a lot of times there is that fear, that hesitation of like feeling like you're starting over. Like people are like, I don't want to leave my stable income to go pursue this thing because I don't want to feel like a newbie again. I don't want to start at a lower income. But it sounds like you kind of got put in a position where you had no choice but to do that. So how did you kind of navigate that uncertainty amidst everything else going on and all the changes in your life?
Yeah, in my life, there was a confluence of a few factors that really pushed me into entrepreneurship. And they were, yeah, one, the industry lost its luster after I stopped drinking. And listen, there are plenty of people who work in the industry who don't drink anymore. And for a while, I was doing consulting, and I will still consult sometimes for, you know, brands in the industry because I know it so well, and I have a huge network of genuine friends. Right, like it's not like I just gave up all of my friends from that industry when I moved to something else, but it wasn't just that. Also, one of my sons is on the spectrum, and he was having a very hard time at school. And it became clear to my wife and I that we needed a little bit more flexibility in our lives to pick him up early, answer those phone calls, take him to therapy appointments, and on and on and on. And I just said, okay, I will quit my job. I will become primary, kid shuffler and spin up a consulting business and just jump into entrepreneurship. And that was the that was the other like biggest push. That was the most urgent one. The other ones always kind of felt like entrepreneurship was something I would think about from time to time, but that's the thing that like really pushed me into it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you basically made that transition by jumping into a consultant role, kind of similar to what you were doing before. And this was after you went to rehab and you were not entertaining alcohol anymore, but you still worked in that industry just as a way to start an entrepreneurial practice.
Yeah, so here's what happened is my wife and I talked about it, and I said, okay, like I want to get out of this industry. We need somebody to be more flexible. And okay, I'll go get my real estate license. And my family has been in real estate for a long time. My aunt's been in it forever. My mom. And I was like, oh, I'll just do that. And then the month I got my license, the interest rates went from 2 to 7.
Okay.
And the market especially for new agents slowed down tremendously, so I couldn't just rely on shifting into that. So I said okay, well, one of the problems that developing brands have is they need help navigating the sales and distribution, like the whole supply chain, like from their warehouses to the consumer's table. And so that's their problem. Their other problem is they don't have a budget to pay somebody who has 15 years of experience doing it. So I said, okay, well, I will pitch myself as like the sales director light for these brands. And I sent out, I don't know, I probably sent out 20 cold emails to brands who I thought would fit that, like, small brands who don't have a sales team, who could probably use somebody to help them manage their distribution partners and shape their go to market strategy. And I feel very fortunate. I landed 3 clients in my first month, and I thought, oh, why didn't I do this forever ago? Right. And so that's, yeah. So I still was doing real estate on the side of that, but consulting then became my number one revenue stream.
Right. The consulting ate the real estate.
It did. Oh my, so fast too. It ate it so fast.
Yeah. That's cool
Yeah.
though. That I feel like that's an inspired idiot moment right there where you're like, "Hey, let's just send out these emails and see what happens and maybe nobody will respond, but maybe some people will." And you got 3
In like,
clients.
yeah, in a week and a half or something, like it happened very fast.
Wow.
And it did make me think, like, why didn't I do this 2 years ago? Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's how I got into entrepreneurship, is that, I was a little bit forced into it, and then thought I was going to go down one path. That path got blocked. So I went down another one. And then and then as I was doing that, like, it was good, it was fine, but I was still looking for a way to just get out of the industry, and I'd been doing a lot of writing. We can talk about it a little bit, but writing became the center of, kind of my self-care routine. And as I was kind of working through my own issues and thinking about, like, how I was setting up my own self-care, I was like, there's something here that I think is useful for people. Um, and I thought, okay, well, maybe this will be, like, 4 blog posts, or maybe it's 10 blog posts. And then it turned into something more. It turned into a book. And so I just started writing and writing and writing. Uh, and then I thought, like, this is the thing. I want to write for a living. And that's an idea that I had decades ago, but didn't see how I could actually turn it into anything worthwhile or practical or anything that would pay my bills, until I did, like, a little over a year ago.
Okay. Gotcha. Oh my gosh. Okay. You said something before about how at one point in your life you thought, mental health was kind of fluffy. It's, it doesn't matter. You had that kind of masculine energy. Did you find that when you got into entrepreneurship, that shifted it even more? And the reason I ask is because in my experience, I find entrepreneurship is an incredibly self-reflective journey. Like you have to get really honest with yourself. You got to recognize when you're your own problem. If the business isn't growing, then you kind of only have one person to look at. So it really forces you to look inward a little bit. So what was that like, kind of going from that sales role with, the wine industry to being a full-time entrepreneur, like mentally for you?
You're 100% right. Yeah, a lot of self-reflection, and I'm grateful that I developed my writing routine, because it helps so much with that. Um, in a couple ways. Okay, so there are two. One is it certainly helps with self-reflection, and there's some pretty cool stats on this. So one problem that I see entrepreneurs have is that they overthink. Their brains just go, 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 go. And there's a psychologist at the University of Michigan. His name is Ethan Kross, and he has a great book called Chatter. Highly recommend it. He opens that book by explaining that our minds can generate 4,000 words per minute. Okay. So to put that in perspective, if you listen to a podcast at 3.5 speed, that's like 400 words a minute. And you won't
What?
understand a damn thing at 3.5 speed, right? Okay. But your brain will go 10 times faster. It's too much to process. You have to find ways to slow it down. You have to find ways to transform your thoughts to language. And you can do it a couple ways. You can talk like we are now, right? You speak at something like 120 to 140 words per minute, way slower than 4,000. You can also type, right? If you're super fast at typing, you're 60 words a minute. Most people are probably closer to 40 words per minute. Okay, so that is much easier to process. And then if you write by hand, that's like 13 words per minute. Okay, like a snail's pace. And that practice really helps you understand your thoughts a little bit better. And that helps the entrepreneur journey so much, because, like you said, you have to be very reflective. But one of the problems with that is if you just let those thoughts spin in your brain, it's 4,000 words a minute. Most of them are negative, and you're going to put yourself in a really bad place.
Yeah.
So
And
writing, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned earlier something about like having to work on it continually. I feel like that's something that I'm always saying, like I learn something and then I relearn it and then I relearn it again, because working on your mentality, especially in the entrepreneur game, I
Yeah.
see it a lot like physical exercise. Like you don't go to the gym for 1 week and you're like, "Great, I'm fit forever now." But sometimes we kind of assume that, like, oh, if I practice, gratitude journaling and meditation and stuff, then like I'll be good. But you don't realize until you realize that you do have to like upkeep it. Like your brain is a muscle in the same way that any other muscle in your body needs to be worked continually to keep that state. I feel like I go through seasons where life gets busier and I don't write and journal or meditate as much, and I feel it. Like those
Yeah.
negative thoughts and emotions start to resurface again. And I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't been, keeping up with what helps me keep that kind of in balance.
100%, 100%. And so that actually, I'm glad you brought that up because it's sort of the center of my routine, which to me is a little bit more of a ritual now, right? But uh, I spend like 90 seconds every morning filling out a little form, right? I have turned it into a Google form because I want to capture it into a spreadsheet because I'm a nerd. But what it does is, I rate how I slept, how I felt yesterday, like my mood yesterday. Was it a shit day or was it an awesome day? Um, what did I eat? Like, was it like on plan or did I eat like a garbage person? Yeah, so it's sleeping, eating, my mood, and did I achieve my goal for the day, right? Like I set up a daily goal for myself. And a lot of these things were just check-ins every morning in rehab, right? Uh, and I just kind of kept it going, figured out a way to put it to rate it. I rate on a 1 to 4 scale, which is also nerdy, and we can talk about that later. But I think 1 to 4 scale is the best scale. Uh, but what happens is then it goes on a graph. And line graphs are important because the research shows that when we look at line graphs, we can see a story immediately. And especially if I track my weight too. I used to be really big. I used to be obese, over 200 pounds. And the data shows that you don't just weighing yourself will not help you lose weight and it won't help you maintain your weight or anything else, but it can be a helpful piece of your plan. And that was certainly true for me for lots and lots of reasons. But one of them is when you see the trend lines, you notice a couple of things. Number one, they go up and down all the time. It's not smooth at all. And that to me has really put a lot of things in perspective, right? Like each data point is fairly insignificant to me. And I'm really more interested in the trend line in everything, my weight, my mood, my sleep, because, you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days, but you want to look at the trend. And number two, you can see where those things shift, right? And when I'm tracking my mood and my sleep and my weight, how I ate, I can see how they affect each other, right? Because none of these things exist in a vacuum. They all exist together. And when you see all those lines together and how they move together, then it really starts to make sense. Like, oh, okay, you know what? Actually, just eating okay and sleeping 4 hours a night is not good for my body. It's not good for my emotions. It's not good for my relationships either. And that's why it's, I think, such a powerful tool because you can see how everything is connected.
Yeah, and that's I think a really common thing. Like when people make that shift into full-time entrepreneurship, I've seen this in so many LinkedIn posts, but it's like you trade the 9 to 5 for a 24/7
Mhm.
because now you feel that pressure of like, okay, I need to succeed, or you're in a community of people that you see being successful and you feel like, oh, I'm falling behind, I need to work harder. So I've gone through it. I've seen a lot of other people that I've connected with go through it where they're cutting back on their sleep, they're skipping the gym, they're skipping like any kind of social life, which, to an extent can work. But the way that I think about it and what I kind of live by is if I don't have my health, I'm not going to have a business. Like if I don't have my health, then none of this matters at the end of the day. And this is something that I'm really glad you brought this up because I mean on the topic of having your health, something that I kind of experienced when I was going through having an eating disorder was I always kind of felt like this internal turmoil within myself. Like my mind and my body were kind of like at war with each other,
Yeah.
just not on the same team. It's like my mind was kind of forcing my body to do something it didn't naturally want to do. And at the time, I didn't recognize it for what it was, but looking back now, I see how much like nervous system dysregulation that causes, and it really kind of messes with the relationship that you have with yourself. So I'm curious for you, being that you've had multiple experiences where your health was really not in an optimal place. Did you ever
Yeah.
experience a feeling similar to that?
Not in an optimal place is maybe a little understatement, but yes, 100%. One of the most embarrassing things I had to get over when it came to my drinking was that it seemed so simple. And intellectually, I could say to myself, like, drink 2 beers, not 12 beers. This is simple. It's so simple. But then in practice, it was not so simple. Like, actually, kind of impossible for a very long time. So that's an example of where like I knew something, but I couldn't do it. And it's because I wasn't considering so many things. I wasn't considering the reasons why I was drinking so much, or like the itch that I was really trying to scratch was hidden from me. And then when I uncovered it got so much better. I feel much more aligned now with where I want to be and what I'm actually doing. But I spent years having that brain body disconnect. Like I was like a guy who thought like these two things were different, right? Like the neck disconnected your mind and your body, and the two were completely separate. And it obviously could not be further from the truth, but that's the way I live my life for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, is like you kind of think that it, it's not that I thought that they weren't connected. I mean, obviously they are, but I just kind of thought, oh, my body's not doing what I want it to do. I want to lose weight, I want to gain muscle, my body's not doing it. And when you think about it, in my case with an eating disorder, like at least in the beginning, you very much are forcing your body to do something it doesn't naturally want to do. But it's your brain telling it, no, we have to do this. We this is our goal, we need to do this. And then eventually, I don't know if it works this way with all forms of addiction, but eventually your body kind of gets on board and it becomes addicted to what you've taught it to become addicted to. So it's a very deep conversation, but it's very I feel like people who have gone through addiction, eating disorders, even like chronic illnesses understand that feeling of feeling like my brain and my body were in two different places and I
Yeah.
had to learn how to realign them and almost like trust my body again in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and for me, I wouldn't even say again. For me, it was for the first time. You know, yeah. I always thought that I could just think my way out of problems instead of feeling my way and like really paying attention to my body. Yeah,
So
exactly.
how did you navigate that or kind of make that shift? Is that something else that you learned in rehab or
So the framework that I started paying attention to is called HALT, HALT, and this happens because so this is a good this go this yeah this feeds back pretty well. So uh, when you talk about your body kind of for addicts, I would say, it builds a tolerance. So your body builds a tolerance to the alcohol. So you'll hear about people at the peak of their addiction drinking full bottles of whiskey a day, right? Just like insane amounts because the body's become tolerant. And when you stop drinking, then your body bounces back pretty quick. Your body's tolerance for the alcohol will go down much faster than your urge to drink it. And I found this out because I would take a lot of months off, right? Dry January is big now, sober October, those kinds of things. So I used to do that back in the day, but I did them in February because it's the shortest month. And yeah, right. But what would happen is, through that month of not drinking, my body's tolerance would go way down, but my urge to consume did not change. It's sort of like, when people go to the fast food restaurant, they have their like order. And it's like that. It's like if you drink 4 beers to get drunk, you will drink four. Your mind wants 4 beers to get drunk, right? But after a month, maybe your body only needs one. My mind always beat my body. And the week after coming back from one of those month-long breaks was always terrible because I always overdid it. And those were some of the biggest consequences that I faced. And in fact, one of the reasons why I ended up going to rehab, right? I took February off. My wife's birthday is in March, at the beginning of March, and I messed up, too drunk to go to her birthday. And that was kind of the then a month later, a month and a half later, I checked myself into rehab, right? So pretty fast tumble there after that. And in talking to my therapist, I said, well, the stats on people making it a year without drinking are pretty awful. If you include all addictions, it's like 82% of people don't make it a year, right? If you just talk about alcohol, it's like 2/3 of people will relapse within a year. And I said, how do people mess this up all the time? And she said, people don't make good decisions when they're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And I said, that's scary. Because we're just those things all the time because we're humans. On top of that, it felt like it would take a lot of willpower for me to stop myself if I'm feeling like I want to drink and saying, okay, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? And then if I think I am, then to make a good decision, which is to eat something, call someone, whatever, or a bad decision, or the easy decision, which is to go have a drink. And I did not make it into rehab by having good willpower. So I thought, okay, I understand why this framework is powerful, but I got to figure out a way that I can harness it. And I decided I just needed to be a little bit more proactive, whereas it was taught to me as a reactive approach, right? Like you're feeling bunched up, react. Are you feeling hungry? But I thought, well, what if I just set myself up so that I'm eating, so that I'm not hungry all the time? Like I don't get hungry enough to make bad decisions. If I'm processing my emotions by writing in a journal instead of stuffing them, then I won't have emotional outbursts and things like that. If I'm proactively calling my friends instead of isolating, then I won't have to feel lonely as much. And if I prioritize my sleep and exercise, then I'll have the energy to keep it all up. And that's what it morphed into.
Yeah. That brought me back to what we were talking about earlier in therapy of kind of having that moment of realizing, oh, this is an ongoing thing. Like this is about just being human. Like saying we make bad decisions when you're hungry, tired, upset, lonely, and you're like, well, that's just kind of life. And I remember having a kind of, I would call it an aha moment. I will never forget this as long as I live. When I was sitting there with my therapist and I was saying that I just wanted to be better already. I said, I just want to get there already. I just want to get to the point where I feel like I'm totally normal again. And I remember she looked me in the eye and she said, Kelsey, you had an addiction to something that you can't cut out of your life. You can't cut out food.
Yeah.
So you have, if we're going to move forward, which we are, you are going to find a way to recreate that relationship with food, because that is the only option you have. And not only recreate that relationship, but recreate a better one that you
Hmm.
didn't think that you could even have before. And that was kind of one of those moments where you realize, like, oh, this is something I'm going to work on for the rest of my life. And it's
Absolutely.
heavy, but it's also kind of exciting because it's not just like a one quick fix. You're like, this is going to be a journey.
I like to tell people, like, the quick fixes are usually just quick, right? They don't fix much. Yeah. And I had a similar conversation with somebody in my treatment program. And this guy was a heroin addict, and he said, I feel really bad for people who are alcoholics, because you just drive by advertisements for alcohol, or people just drink alcohol all the time. And if my drug of choice was just in my face all the time, there's no way. And you think, like, if you have to choose between being addicted to heroin or alcohol, which would you pick? Like, you'd want to pick neither. But, I think intuitively people would say, like, not heroin. But he said, like, the thought of living day to day with that just around. And so, like, in your example, it's even like, that's even more like, yeah, like food, like, that's hard. You got to have it, and you have to have a better relationship with it. And that's, man, good for you.
Yeah, but it goes back to what you said, that you kind of have to do that deep inner work, that self-reflection, and realizing the triggers and the patterns, and okay,
Yeah.
what new habits can I implement to not put me in the position where I'm going to go back to my old way of doing things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is something that will never end. It will never end.
Yeah, definitely. I would like to ask you about your cancer diagnosis. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
100%.
Because one of the things that I find I think about often is that wealth and success, I feel like in entrepreneurship, we kind of associate success with the business growing, monetary. And I feel like I'm constantly reminding myself that wealth is more than just that. Wealth is also having a healthy body, having good relationships, having autonomy and freedom. And a thought that comes into my mind constantly is, in those moments where I feel like I'm getting down on myself, the business isn't doing as good as I want it to be, I'm comparing myself to other people. It's like a gut reaction that the first thing that comes to my mind is, I have my health. And that
Mhm.
is another kind of wealth that I can't go and pick that up on the street like I can find money. And so that's kind of become like a reassurance for me that I always kind of fall back on. But then when you go through those moments in life where you don't feel like you have your health, I mean, this is a very, very minor example, but a couple months back, I had a few pinched sciatic nerves in my back, and it was one of the
Mhm.
most painful experiences I've ever had. It sounds like
Mhm.
such a common injury, but when you actually have it, you're like, this is wildly debilitating. I couldn't even like undress to get in the shower. So I really felt useless. And
Yeah.
in those moments, I couldn't tell myself that, like, oh, I still have my health, because I didn't feel like I did.
Right.
So that was mentally kind of hard to work through. And I know with your story, you went through something much more scary than that. So I'm wondering, how did you navigate that mentally? Because there's no roadmap for that.
I got my cancer diagnosis 108 days after I stopped drinking. And it was in the week that I was supposed to leave my treatment program. And I'm so happy it went that way, because if I would have gotten a cancer diagnosis before I went to treatment and figured all this out, I would have drank my way through it for sure. And who knows, maybe, you know, maybe it gets so bad that, maybe I die, maybe I don't die, but maybe I'm divorce, maybe I don't, the consequences. Yeah, I could spend days thinking about what could have happened. And I don't want to do that to myself. But I am grateful that I figured all of this out and put this routine into place before my cancer diagnosis, because it helped me approach it in, I think, the best way that I probably could. And so it was, I just, with James Clear, right? You fall to the level of your systems, right? And I put a pretty good system into place, and that helped me when I didn't even have my health to fall back on. And it's also one of the ways that I could tell that my system was like only half working, right? So, when many people, when they get sober, go to therapy, they're like, okay, I'm going to start taking better care of myself, right? And I certainly needed to do that. I was overweight. I was not eating well. I had a terrible relationship with food, because I was just like, healthy eating is for losers. Like, no, give me the nachos, right? So it's so dumb. But it's like how I thought, right? I was like, no, I'm not that kind of person who's going to eat a salad or whatever. Like, I'm going to eat whatever I want to eat because I do what I want. And so I lost 20 pounds after I gave up drinking. Was working out pretty well, feeling good. And then I got this cancer diagnosis. And back when I was drinking, I would, like, everybody would go to sleep in my house, and then I would pour myself a whiskey and soda or 4, right? When I got the cancer diagnosis, would put the kids to bed, and I would sit on the couch and watch some TV, and then serve myself like 4 scoops of ice cream. And I didn't realize it in the moment, but I just made a 1-to-1 substitution. And eating ice cream better than drinking whiskey and soda, yes, but that doesn't make it good. And I remember stepping on the scale one day, and I gained all of the weight that I had lost when I got sober. And I thought, like, ooh, like I've made a little progress, right? Because I kept my sobriety, but I need to add in a few more things, because I was journaling, but I wasn't paying attention. Like, it needed some work. The foundation was there, but it needed a little bit of work. And that's when I started, tracking my weight, tracking my food, and really kind of put all this into a spreadsheet, because before it was just journaling, really. Like, I was just writing, and I wasn't tracking my mood, and I wasn't tracking my sleep. And then when I started paying attention to, some of the more physical aspects of it, right? And doing the work to connect how I was feeling in my head to how I was feeling in my body to how I was feeling in my feelings, that only took shape when I realized that I was really out of whack throughout my cancer diagnosis and treatment and everything else. So it definitely took something that I started building in rehab, which was good and necessary and powerful, and then, like, put it over the top and help me through some of the hardest parts about my cancer journey, because I didn't go through chemo or radiation. My style of cancer doesn't respond to those, so it was just surgery. So it just got cut out of me. And it was in my shoulder blade, so I got my shoulder blade removed, and I have a prosthetic in there now. But from the moment that I knew I had cancer to the moment when I didn't have it anymore was very fast, like a month maybe. Like,
Wow.
yeah, super fast. Like, my surgeon called it big, scary, dangerous, rare cancer, right? It was like the cancer bingo. So they moved fast. When they found it, they moved fast. And another topic that comes up in entrepreneurship a lot is imposter syndrome. And so it's real. And sometimes I have imposter syndrome about being a cancer survivor, because I didn't really suffer when I had cancer, right? they found it, and I was like, oh, that's why my shoulder has been hurting for a year. But then they cut it out of me and it was gone. All of my suffering came afterwards, right? After in my, like, yeah, I mean, well, it's rehab, but like my physical therapy to, to recover from my surgeries and learning how to live with a prosthetic scapula and things like that. That's when my suffering came, not when I had cancer. And so the changes that I made to the journal at that point, after my surgeries had been done, really helped me through the most difficult part of the cancer journey.
Oh man, there's so many things there I want to touch on. Imposter syndrome as a cancer survivor. That's one I've definitely never heard before, but I totally understand what you're saying there. It's very interesting. You talked about how you kind of traded that habit. You're like, okay, I'm eating lots of ice cream, not the best, but I'm not drinking anymore, so it feels like a win. And that's actually something I learned is really, really common when people are overcoming some kind of addiction. Is you kind of cope by finding something else to swap it with. It's the
Mm-hmm.
same reason why a lot of people when they give up smoking will gain weight because they want to satisfy that urge by eating. That's something I did as well. Even after I told myself, okay, I'm recovered, I am no longer bulimic, I would try different diets and then kind of find a way to turn that into an eating disorder. And now it's kind of a joke that I say to people is that I can turn anything into an eating disorder. It's a bit of a dark joke, but if
Yeah.
you get it, you get it. You know, we've all kind of been through that. Um oh man, I feel like so many things came to my mind there, but now I'm blanking on what question I have. So I know you said that writing. Oh, this was it. That journaling became like a very kind of core practice for you. And it's very interesting because I remember, but at least with my generation growing up, journaling was kind of seen as like a dear diary type thing. You don't want anybody to read it. It's like something you kind of do in private. And now I have journals lying all over the house. And my mom asked me once, she's like, "What is this notebook?" I was like, "Oh, it's my journal." And she's like, "Oh, okay, that's private. You should put it somewhere." I'm like, "No, I just leave it there. I sit on the couch and I journal and it's nothing like it's all my deepest and darkest thoughts, but I don't have that same thought about journaling anymore that like it needs to be something private. I actually think everybody should do it, especially if you are an entrepreneur and especially if you're an entrepreneur who does any kind of writing. Because journaling itself is writing. Like you said with the 4,000 thoughts a minute, it literally forces you to slow down and put your thoughts down on paper and kind of sort them in a way. So I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. I leave my journals out and anybody could read them and they're weird sometimes.
One thing that we did in treatment a lot, yeah, we would journal, and then our therapist says, anybody brave enough to share it, and then sometimes we would. But you're right, journaling I don't think is just for like my journal. Yeah, when I was a kid, it was like either dear diary stuff or it was a lot of like, here's what I did today, just like a chronicle of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what my journal looks like at all now. What I For me, and I think for anybody who's an overthinker, some of the most dangerous feelings that you can have are resentments and ruminations.
Mm-hmm.
These degrade all of the rest of your feelings. And one of the big unlocks that I had for my writing routine is that I came up with like the 7 pillars of my life, and I journal on those topics weekly. And what it does is it allows me or forces me to shine a light into the darkest areas of my emotions and make sure that I'm scraping out any resentments that might have been building, because I know that if they build up too far, it's going to hurt my relationships, it's going to hurt my emotions, it's going to lead me to overeat. That's like one of my things. Like I am an emotional eater. A lot of times when I see myself overeating, then that's like it's a canary in my emotional coal mine. I say, "Ooh, there's actually something else going on here." Uh, And so by cycling through these 7 topics, and the prompts change all the time, but the topics stay the same for the most part, it helps me alleviate any ruminations that I have on topics, and it helps me stop building resentments either towards myself or towards the most important people in my life. And I set up the schedule for a normal kind of Monday to Friday routine. So on Monday, I write about affirmations. We talked about how so many of your thoughts are negative. So I want to be my own hype man on Monday, get myself going. Tuesday, flip the coin. Challenging emotions. You have to deal with them. Might as well deal with them Tuesday. On Wednesday, I call it Slay the Dragon Day. And I find that people with big projects smile a lot. And big projects have a way of teaching us about the little things and about making progress, progress over perfection, and things like that. And so, for a while, my dragon or my big project was sobriety, and then it was cancer, and now it's the book that I'm writing. And so, but it'll always, like, I'll always have a big project that I'm working on because I think they're really important. And so I write about those on Wednesday. Then on Thursday, I flip and I write about my marriage, because you can get a lot of work done in your relationships when you're by yourself. It sounds weird, but I think that most conflict stems from miscommunication, not malice. And when we go into conflicts without understanding our own point of view or what we're looking for, it makes it almost impossible to really have good connections or to repair any conflicts that we have. And that being said, I don't just write about bad things in my marriage. Like, most of my journal prompts are actually pretty good. And they're like, oh, what are the good things that are happening in our relationship? Things like that. But that happens Thursday. On Friday, it's work, because I want to get all of that out before the weekend. And when I think back to working for companies as well, a lot of times you'd have Friday recap meetings. So if you get all of that out in the morning on Friday, then you can walk into that meeting with well thought out ideas that'll be really helpful for your team as well. So kind of an added bonus there. Saturday, I read about my kids. And I'll say, when I look at the prompts that I use, if somebody's out there looking for journal prompts and they're like, I don't have kids, your friends are a good substitute for most of the prompts that I use about my kids. And then on Sunday, it's aspirations. And Sunday is a good day to dream. It's a good day to think about your bigger goals. And it actually helps me not dread Mondays as much, because it reminds myself of all the cool things I'm going to do that week. Why am I building this business? What are the things that I want to achieve? And it kind of settles me down and lets me have a nice Sunday. It gets me away from the Sunday scaries, because I get it out in the morning.
I like that. That's really smart. Instead of just kind of sitting down and journaling every day and just probably feeling like you're writing about the same things every single day, you have a certain day that you assign a topic to, and then you just you can pour yourself into that topic. That's really smart.
Yeah, thank you. And the other thing it does is it's a little bit more confrontational for myself. I try to make sure there's nowhere to hide, right? These are the 7 most important things in my life. So there's no running away from the thing that I don't want to think about, because it's going to come up in the schedule.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a really good point. If it's the most important things, then if you find yourself resisting kind of giving that thing attention, then okay, there's probably something to address there.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Awesome. That's super cool. I'm into that. I might try that.
Steal it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Steal
will.
it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I know we're getting close to wrap up. One of the other questions that I had pre-written down here, so I'm just going to read my notes. One of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of entrepreneurs, we all kind of have this drive for more. We feel like we're pulled for more, right? We're pulled to achieve, to create something different, to make some kind of change. I feel very pulled to basically just figure out how to build that dream life and how to show other people that they can do the same. they don't have to settle for what they see around them. They just have to embrace kind of, figuring it out as we go, as I said. So I know you told me that you're kind of in this shift in your career where you're leaning more into speaking and you're writing your book. I know you do ghostwriting as well. So I'm curious for you, what do you feel drives you to be an entrepreneur and to focus on the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. My main motivation didn't come from my bank account. It came from my family. The only reason I'm an entrepreneur now is so that I could drive my kids to school and pick them up and take them to karate or to coding or to, whatever summer camps they have. And the business was a way for me to be able to pay the mortgage, pay my bills, all the rest of that while making time for the kids. That is a balance though, right? Like as my business has grown and developed a little bit, like the time does get pinched because you feel like you need to jam more into it so that you can keep the graph going up. And writing about that on Fridays is a good check, because a lot of the prompts are, is your life and the way that you're feeling aligned to the way that you want it to feel, and why you got into this in the first place. And for me, it's okay, am I still making time for my family, and am I still there for them? And then like I really do want to help people. And like a lot of people dealing with addiction, a lot of people dealing with cancer, unfortunately. Like, I just happen to sit on the corner or have these experiences um, that a lot of people have gone through. And there's I think that you'll hear writers say a lot, maybe they're writing for an audience, but really they're writing for themselves. And then there just happens to be other people out there. And that's certainly true for me. And in my mind, here's a good story about why I like to share my stories. So when I was coming up on a year of sobriety, I thought about going to an AA meeting so I could collect my 1 year chip. And I had certainly gone to a lot of AA meetings throughout my early sobriety, but it wasn't the primary place where I worked on myself. And I felt a little like, I don't know, I haven't been to a meeting in like 2 months or something, and it would feel weird to show up like just to get a chip, right? It felt a little materialistic, and I felt a little weird about it. But my wife said, no, you have to go. Because what if there's somebody there and it's their first meeting? They're going to sit there and they're going to look around and they're going to hear stories from people who are 15 years in, 20 years in, or they're also really new. And I remember that feeling. I remember that feeling in my first week and hearing somebody who had 38 days and thinking like, it seems like forever. But a year for somebody who's kind of newer, like does seem achievable, right? It's like one rotation around the sun. So I said, okay. And sure enough, there was somebody there and it was their very first meeting. And they mentioned to me when the meeting ended how they appreciated my sharing about a year and how I was feeling there because it was an aspiration that they had. And it just, like, in that moment, like, it kind of encapsulated everything, that it's incumbent upon us to share our stories, because we're going to run into people who are at the beginning of a journey that we're in the middle of, and everything that we've learned to that point is incredibly valuable to them. At the same time, you're going to run into people who are kind of your peers, right? Or in the same place where you are, and you can share your struggles and compare notes about what's working for you, what you've tried, what didn't work. And that camaraderie is incredibly important. especially for entrepreneurs, because it can feel lonely, especially if you're the only one in your friend group. Everybody else has a 9 to 5, but you're kind of building this thing on the side. That's a lonely place to be. And if you're not looking out and connecting with other entrepreneurs and sharing your story, that's why I was so happy that you wanted to connect, because I'm all about that. But then you also put up a flag to the people who are way ahead of you, because they get a lot out of mentorship just as much as you learn from them. They feel that when they're able to give back. And there's an old, I guess, mantra or cliche that you learn a lot by teaching. And so by throwing up the flag and signaling to the people who are ahead of you, it shows them who to reach back for, to pull up, to get to where they are. And that's so there's three buckets: the people behind you, the people with you, and the people ahead of you. And they're all incredibly important. And it's critical to connect with all three types of people. But if you stay silent, the people who need your help will never get it. The people who are your peers won't know to connect with you. And the people ahead of you who could help you won't know where to throw the life jacket or the life preserver.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And that's something I think a lot of people kind of resist, is reaching out to people that they feel are ahead of them, because you're like, "Oh, like I don't know what value I have to give you back. I don't want to waste your time." But it is true. You do learn a lot by teaching, and also if those people are in mentorship positions, it is valuable for them to see what people need help with that, they could provide.
100%. And people do feel good when they help. People
Yeah.
want to be helpers, and you have to give them the opportunity.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's a good note to end it on.
Awesome.
I'm going to hit stop on the live stream here. Thank you for hopping on with me. I'll get you to hang
Thank you.
on for a second before
Of
we
course.
close it out. But all right.
Yeah, I appreciate it.